Get on the ground now. The young officer's voice cracked with aggressive authority as he forced the elderly black man face down on the pavement. What Officer Matthews didn't realize was that those exact words had been shouted at him hundreds of times during police academy by the very men he was now arresting. Where are you watching this video from? Don't forget to leave your city in the comments as well. Remember, every comment is a voice. Every voice is a change. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. as Officer Bradley Matthews cruised through the quiet residential streets of Riverside Heights, a predominantly white, upper-middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Phoenix. At 23 years old and 6 months into his career with the Phoenix Police Department, Bradley felt the intoxicating rush of authority that came with the badge, the gun, and the power to stop anyone, anywhere, for any reason he deemed sufficient. Bradley had graduated from the police academy with mediocre grades and a reputation for aggression that his instructors had repeatedly tried to temper. But in his mind, those instructors were old school, too concerned with political correctness and community relations. This was the real world, and the real world required real force. His radio crackled, "All units, be advised of increased patrol in Riverside Heights due to recent break-ins. Suspects described as young black males." Bradley's eyes lit up. Finally, some action. As he turned onto Maple Drive, his headlights caught a late model sedan driving at exactly the speed limit. The driver appeared to be an elderly black man alone, in a neighborhood where black residents were rare. In Bradley's mind, this was automatic probable cause. He hit his lights. The sedan immediately pulled over, parking carefully at the curb with hazard lights activated. The driver's hands were visible on the steering wheel. Everything about the stop suggested compliance and experience with police interactions. Thomas "Tank" Johnson, 68 years old, felt the familiar weight of exhaustion settle on his shoulders as he saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. After 30 years as a police officer, including 15 years as a training instructor at the Phoenix Police Academy, he knew exactly what was happening. Another case of driving while black in a white neighborhood. He kept his hands on the wheel and waited. Officer Matthews approached the driver's side window with his hand resting on his service weapon, his body language aggressive and confrontational. He tapped sharply on the glass with his flashlight, license and registration. He barked before the window was even fully down. Thomas reached slowly into his glove compartment, his movements deliberate and visible. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why you stopped me?" Bradley's jaw tightened. "Don't ask me questions. I asked the questions here." Thomas handed over his documents, noting the young officer's name tag, B. Matthews. The name triggered a memory, but he couldn't place it immediately. Bradley examined the license with his flashlight. "Thomas Johnson. What are you doing in this neighborhood, Mr. Johnson?" "I'm driving home from my daughter's house. She lives on Oak Street." "Oak Street, huh?" Bradley's tone was mocking. "Fancy neighborhood for someone like you." Thomas felt his jaw clench, but kept his voice level. "Someone like me, officer? Don't get smart with me," Bradley snapped. "Step out of the vehicle." "Officer, I haven't violated any traffic laws." "On what grounds are you?" "Get out of the car now." Bradley's voice exploded with artificial authority. As Thomas stepped out of his vehicle, his movements triggered a memory in Officer Matthews, the same measured, confident movements he'd seen hundreds of times during academy training. But the connection didn't click. Not yet. Thomas complied, stepping out with his hands visible. At 6'1", with the bearing of a man who'd commanded respect for decades, he towered over the shorter, younger officer. His calm demeanor only seemed to infuriate Bradley more. "Turn around. Hands behind your back," Bradley ordered, pulling out his handcuffs. "Officer Matthews," Thomas said calmly, finally placing the name. "You're making a mistake. The only mistake is you thinking you can question my authority." Bradley snarled, grabbing Thomas's wrist roughly. "I'm not resisting," Thomas said evenly, "but I think you should know who you're arresting." "I don't care if you're the mayor," Bradley replied, clicking the handcuffs tight. "You're under arrest for suspicious behavior and failure to comply with the lawful order." As the metal cuffs clicked shut, Thomas closed his eyes. In his mind, he could hear his own voice from countless training sessions. "The badge doesn't make you superior to the citizens you serve. It makes you their protector. Never forget that your authority comes with responsibility." Bradley pushed Thomas toward the patrol car, his adrenaline pumping with the rush of dominance. He'd shown this old man who was in charge. "Get on the ground now," Bradley shouted unnecessarily as he forced Thomas face down on the pavement next to the patrol Car. Thomas complied, his cheek against the cold asphalt. Those words echoed in his mind. He'd heard them before, shouted in his direction, but not as a suspect, as an instructor. Matthews, get on the ground now. Do you think this is a game? When I give you an order during defensive tactics training, you follow it immediately. The memory crashed over him like a wave. Bradley Matthews, Academy Class 2023B, the recruit who'd failed his first practical exam, who'd struggled with de-escalation techniques, who'd shown concerning signs of racial bias during sensitivity training. The recruit he'd personally worked with for extra hours, trying to instill the values of community policing and equal treatment under the law. The recruit, whose academy certificate bore his own signature as head training instructor. The booking process at the precinct was routine until Desk Sergeant Rivera saw the name on the arrest report. His face went ashen. Matthews, he whispered, do you have any idea who you just brought in? At the Phoenix Police Department's 15th precinct, the booking area buzzed with its usual late-night activity. Desk Sergeant Maria Rivera, a 20-year veteran, looked up from her paperwork as Officer Matthews strutted in with his arrestee. What TV we got, Matthews? She asked routinely, then looked up to see the handcuffed man. Her pen clattered to the desk. Sergeant Major Johnson? She whispered, her voice filled with disbelief and horror. Thomas looked up, recognizing Rivera immediately. Hello, Maria. I see you made sergeant. I always knew you would. Rivera's hands shook as she stood up. Sir, what? How? Matthews, what the hell did you do? Bradley looked confused. I arrested a suspect for suspicious behavior and failure to comply. Standard procedure. Standard procedure? Rivera's voice rose to a near shout. Do you know who this is? Some old man who thought he could give me attitude, Bradley replied dismissively. Rivera stared at him in disbelief. This is Sergeant Major Thomas Tank Johnson. He was the head training instructor at the academy for 15 years. He personally trained over 2,000 officers in this department. The color drained from Bradley's face, including you, Rivera continued, her voice deadly quiet. Other officers in the booking area had stopped what they were doing. Word spread quickly through the precinct like wildfire. Within minutes, a crowd of veteran officers had gathered, all staring at the handcuffed figure of their former instructor, Officer Patricia Chen, who'd been on the force for 8 years. Pushed through the crowd. Sergeant Major Johnson trained me, she said, her voice thick with emotion. He's the reason I became a cop, instead of just someone with a badge. Detective Marcus Williams stepped forward. He taught my advanced tactics course. Best instructor the academy ever had. Bradley looked around at the gathering crowd, reality beginning to dawn on him. Every face showed the same expression, respect for the handcuffed man and disgust for the officer who'd brought him in. This has to be a mistake, Bradley stammered. He was acting suspicious. Driving through Riverside Heights, acting suspicious? Detective Williams cut him off. By driving legally through a neighborhood where his daughter lives? The precinct doors burst open as Captain Morrison stormed in, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. 20 years ago, Johnson had been his training instructor. Tonight, he was seeing his mentor in handcuffs, arrested by one of his own officers. Captain Robert Morrison had been at home when the call came in. His watch commander's voice had been shaky. Cap, you need to get down here. Matthews arrested Sergeant Major Johnson. Morrison had barely believed it. He'd thrown on his uniform and driven to the precinct faster than he'd driven in years. Thomas Johnson wasn't just a former instructor, he was the man who'd shaped Morrison's entire philosophy of policing, who'd taught him that real strength came from restraint, that real authority came from respect. He burst through the precinct doors like a man on fire. Where is he? Morrison demanded. The crowd of officers parted silently. Morrison saw Thomas, still handcuffed, sitting on a bench in the booking area. Their eyes met across the room. Tank, Morrison said softly, his voice breaking slightly. Hello, Bobby, Thomas replied calmly. I see you made captain. I always knew you had it in you. Morrison turned to Bradley, his face a mask of controlled rage. Officer Matthews. My office. Now, Captain, and explain, now. As Morrison led Bradley away, Sergeant Rivera quickly moved to unlock Thomas's handcuffs. I'm so sorry, sir, she whispered. This should never have happened. Thomas rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had been. It's not your fault, Maria. This is exactly what I spent years trying to prevent. In Captain Morrison's office, Bradley sat across from his commanding officer, sweat beading on his forehead. Morrison paced behind his desk like a caged animal. Explain to me, Morrison said slowly, how you arrested the most respected training instructor in this department's history for the crime of driving while black. I didn't know who he was, Bradley protested. He was acting suspicious how? By following traffic laws? By keeping his hands visible? By complying with your orders? Morrison's voice rose with each question. He was in Riverside Heights. Black male, at night. Didn't belong in that neighborhood. Morrison stopped pacing. Didn't belong? His daughter lives there. He has every right to drive through any neighborhood in the city. As Morrison pulled out Bradley's academy file, the truth became impossible to ignore. Johnson's signature was on every evaluation, every training report. The man Bradley had arrested was the same man who'd spent countless hours trying to teach him proper policing procedures. Morrison opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick file. Old Matthews, Bradley Academy training record. Let's review your academy performance, shall we? Morrison said, flipping through pages. Failed initial defensive tactics. Failed community relations twice. Required additional training in cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. And who, Morrison continued, signed off on your eventual graduation after providing you with extra training and support? Morrison turned the file around, showing Bradley the signature on his final evaluation. Thomas Tank Johnson, Sergeant Major, Head Training Instructor. Bradley stared at the signature, memories flooding back. Late afternoons in the academy. Gym. Working on proper arrest procedures. Patient instruction on de-escalation techniques. Firm but fair corrections when he'd shown signs of bias or excessive aggression. The same man he just humiliated and arrested. He failed me twice, Bradley whispered. And then spent extra time making sure you passed, Morrison replied. Because he believed you could become a good officer if you learned proper procedures and respect for the community. The weight of his actions crashed down on Bradley like a physical blow. He remembered Johnson's final words to him at graduation. Remember, Officer Matthews, the badge is a privilege, not a right. Treat every citizen with dignity, regardless of their appearance or background. That's what real policing looks like. Meanwhile, in the booking area, word had spread throughout the entire precinct. Officers from every shift had either called in or driven in to pay their respects to their former instructor, the man who'd taught them proper procedures, who'd instilled in them the values of community policing, who'd shaped their careers and their characters. Detective Williams approached Thomas with a cup of coffee. Sergeant Major, I need you to know that not all of us forgot what you taught us. I know, Marcus, Thomas replied, but one is too many. Officer Chen sat down next to him. What are you going to do? You could sue the department, ruin Matthews's career. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, considering his options. He could indeed file a lawsuit. He could call the media. He could destroy Bradley Matthews's career and create a scandal that would rock the entire department. Instead, he thought about the young men who'd struggled through academy training, who'd needed extra help to meet basic standards, who'd shown glimpses of the potential to become a good officer if properly guided. What I'm going to do, Thomas said finally, is the same thing I've always done. I'm going to teach. Back in Morrison's office, Bradley sat in stunned silence, the full weight of his actions sinking in. I've destroyed my career, haven't I? He asked quietly. Morrison leaned back in his chair. That depends on what you do next. What do you mean? Sergeant Major Johnson is in the booking area right now. Every officer in this precinct who was trained by him has come in to see him, to apologize for what happened. Officers who learned from him how to be real cops, how to serve their community with honor. Morrison paused, letting his words sink in. You have two choices, Matthews. You can file your report claiming you followed proper procedures and learn nothing from this experience. Or you can go out there, face the man you wronged, and try to salvage something from this disaster. Bradley's hands shook as he considered his options, his pride, his ego. Everything in him wanted to justify his actions, to claim he'd followed protocol. But the signature on his academy file burned in his memory, along with countless hours of patient instruction from a man who'd believed in him when no one else would. What should I say? Bradley asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Start with, I'm sorry, Morrison replied, and mean it. Bradley walked out of the captain's office and through the precinct to the booking area. The crowd of officers parted to let him through, their expressions ranging from anger to disgust to disappointment. Thomas looked up as Bradley approached, his expression neutral but alert. Sergeant Major Johnson, Bradley began, his voice cracking. I need to apologize. Thomas stood up, his full height and bearing commanding the room's attention. For what, Officer Matthews? For arresting you. For treating you like a criminal. For forgetting everything you tried to teach me. The words came out in a rush, years of suppressed guilt and recognition flooding through him. Thomas studied the young officer's face, seeing genuine remorse, where earlier there had been only arrogance and prejudice. Do you remember what I told you at graduation? Thomas asked. Bradley nodded, tears beginning to form in his eyes. That the badge is a privilege, not a right. That I should treat every citizen with dignity. And did you treat me with dignity? Tonight? No, sir. I treated you like a criminal because of your race and my own prejudices. The booking area was completely silent. 30 officers watched as student faced teacher, as past met present, as the consequences of training and character played out in real time. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card, his business card from his consulting work with police departments on community relations and bias training. Officer Matthews, you have a choice to make. You can continue down the path you're on, letting prejudice and ego guide your decisions, and eventually you'll destroy innocent lives and your own career. Or you can learn from tonight and become the officer I believed you could be when I signed your graduation certificate. Bradley took the card with trembling hands. I run training sessions for officers who want to improve their community relations skills, Thomas continued, every Saturday morning at the community center. You're welcome to attend if you're serious about changing. You'd still teach me? After what I did? Thomas looked around the room at the officers who'd gathered, men and women whose careers he'd shaped, whose principles he'd helped form, whose commitment to justice he'd helped instill. Officer Matthews, I've spent 30 years teaching people to be better cops and better human beings. I'm not going to stop now because one student forgot his lessons. He paused, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that had commanded respect in academy classrooms for 15 years. But understand this, if you attend my sessions, you'll be held to the same standards I held you to in the academy. You'll check your ego at the door, you'll listen more than you speak, and you'll treat every person you encounter regardless of race, age, or social status with the dignity and respect they deserve as human beings. Bradley nodded, understanding that he was being offered something precious and rare, a genuine second chance from the man he'd wronged. I'll be there, sir, every Saturday. Thomas extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Bradley shook it. Then we'll start over, Officer Matthews. But remember, this is your last chance to get it right. As the crowd of officers began to disperse, Detective Williams approached Thomas. Think he'll actually change? He asked quietly. Thomas watched Bradley walk away. The young officer's shoulders bowed with the weight of his mistakes and the possibility of redemption. I've learned never to give up on someone who's genuinely asking for help, Thomas replied. Besides, teaching isn't just about the students who get it right the first time. It's about the ones who stumble, fall, and find the courage to get back up and try again. 6 months later, Officer Bradley Matthews stood before a community meeting in Riverside Heights, the same neighborhood where he'd arrested Thomas Johnson. But tonight, he wasn't there as an enforcer or an occupying force. He was there as part of a new community policing initiative, introducing himself to residents and listening to their concerns. In the back of the room, Thomas Johnson sat quietly, watching his former student engage respectfully with community members, answering questions with patience and humility. After the meeting, Bradley approached his former instructor. Sergeant Major, I wanted to thank you again for giving me a second chance. Thomas smiled. You gave yourself a second chance, Officer Matthews. I just provided the classroom. I've been thinking about what you said that night about treating every citizen with dignity. I understand now that it's not just about following procedures. It's about seeing people as human beings first. Thomas nodded approvingly. Now you're starting to understand what real policing looks like. As they walked out of the community center together, Bradley asked, do you think I'll ever be the kind of officer you hoped I'd become? Thomas considered the question carefully. Officer Matthews, the fact that you're asking that question tells me you're already on the right path. The badge doesn't make you a good cop, your character does. And character is something you have to choose every day, in every interaction. They reached their cars, parked side by side in the community center lot. Same time next Saturday? Bradley asked. Same time next Saturday, Thomas confirmed. We're working on de-escalation techniques with mentally ill suspects. As Bradley drove home that night, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. From arrogant rookie to humbled student to community-focused officer, it hadn't been easy confronting his own prejudices, admitting his mistakes, and rebuilding his reputation from the ground up. But every Saturday morning, sitting in that community center classroom, listening to Thomas Johnson teach the principles of ethical policing and community service, he was reminded of what it truly meant to serve and protect. The arrest that could have ended his career had instead become the beginning of his real education as a police officer. And the man he'd wronged had become his most important teacher, showing him that true authority comes not from fear or force, but from respect, understanding, and the courage to admit when you're wrong. In the end, the most important lesson, Officer Bradley Matthews learned wasn't taught in any academy classroom. It was taught in a precinct booking area, by a man in handcuffs who chose forgiveness over revenge, education over retribution, and hope over despair. Sometimes, the best teachers are the ones who refuse to give up on their students, even when those students have given up on themselves. Where are you watching this video from? Don't forget to leave your city in the comments as well. Remember, every comment is a voice. Every voice is a change. And what about you? Have you ever encountered such an event or situation? Write in the comments. We would like to hear your story.